Hey there, friends on YouTube. My name's Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is the Apple HomePod. It's slightly smaller than my head. It's more the size of a cantaloupe. A cantaloupe. Loop? Lope? Or maybe like a... Yeah, cantaloupe. So today the time has come. We are going to review the Apple HomePod. A lot of people gave me a pretty hard time about me making some preliminary videos about my thoughts on the HomePod before I had heard it. I never made any claims about what it might sound like, regardless of what people seem to think. I don't know if they were watching, what video they were watching. Suffice it to say that now I have the HomePod, and I'm going to tell you what I think about the sound. First off, let me say that it is a really interesting looking, but very aesthetically pleasing device. It's got this mushy fabric on it that isn't quite, it's three-dimensional. It's not just a screen, and you can squish it a little bit. But it's very nice. I got the white because I thought it would pop a little bit more, and it's probably a mistake because the white is clearly going to collect dust and fingerprints and look like crap within 2 or 3 weeks, I'm sure. But it is a very aesthetically pleasing device. The cord is braided, although unfortunately it's locked in and non-replaceable if it happens to get chewed up by your cat or any of those kinds of things. It's a very nice cord, though. There is nothing else on this device. No 3.5 millimeter input or output. No, nothing. No, it's just a tube. There's a touch screen on here that you can use to interact with it, and it has a ton of, finger doodlies that you can do, but you got to learn those. And it has Siri, and Siri, if you just keep it simple, Siri's gonna do you fine. I use Siri for all the creation, for all the control of the music. Hey Siri, play this. Hey Siri, stop. Hey Siri, what's the weather like? It's fine. If you know what Siri is capable of, which is a very limited number of things, then you will be fine with Siri. But this thing, I don't know. I don't have a lot of. I have a lot of smart devices. I don't have a lot of smart devices that hook up to the Apple Home system. So I don't know exactly what I would use it for other than to control music and find out what the weather is and that kind of thing. I did ask it what time the Mountaineers were playing basketball today, and it was able to tell me. Aesthetically, very nice. Very nice. But now let's shift gears and start to talk about sound quality. I'm going to tell you how I approach this. I approach this very seriously. I approach this as though I wanted to give people what they thought I should have given them before, even though I never promised to give them that. I spent a lot of time. The reason this video is coming out on Saturday, right the day after the release, is that I spent about 24 hours in different spaces around my house listening to this thing and trying to really suss out what it is that it's doing and how it's doing it and why I think it's being done. Okay, so let's get into that discussion. One thing that immediately jumped out at me, I had the HomePod set up on one speaker stand, about a 4-foot speaker stand, set right in front of my listening space, my listening post, and I just decided that this is a treated room. It has a lot of acoustic treatment in it, so I decided that it would be good to try it out first here and see what it sounded like. Now this is a larger room as well, so I wasn't super impressed with what I was hearing. I played a lot of material that I was very familiar with, stuff that I knew what it sounded like. I knew what the details were, that I knew I could trust myself to be able to judge what I was hearing from the HomePod versus what I know the song to sound like. And a lot of that stuff, along the lines of the Beatles and my own music that I've recorded and listened to for, hours upon hours and hours to try and get it right. And I found a few things about the sound signature of the HomePod that kind of gave me pause. And I'll talk about that first, and then I'll move on to some other stuff. So a lot of people in early reviews have been talking about the bass, how great the bass is, and how could they possibly have gotten that much bass into such a small little cantaloupe. Well, the bass is impressive. It's deep, it's loud, it extends. And that is an impressive feat for a device this size. However, the problem that I had with the bass is that on nearly every song that I listened to, the bass was so present, had so much extension, and it had this sense of not necessarily being connected to the rest of the song. It was like you have the song, and then you have the bass, and the bass is just going... It really wasn't a pleasant experience, and I found that the mid-range on the speaker was also a little bit overhyped, and while it wasn't unbalanced. The EQ balance is very nice, but the EQ choices that Apple has made are not good in my estimation. When you have a lot of bass and you have a lot of mid-range in the lower mid-range, then it tends to eat up the upper mid-ranges and the highs. So when you're talking about guitars or anything that exists in that mid-range and vocals and that kind of thing, they kind of get lost a little bit, which was very dissatisfying to me. Another thing that was really dissatisfying to me was that while it did fill the room, as Apple promised, there was no sense of directionality in the music. It was still very much a mono experience. The sound was definitely coming from one source, and stuff that I knew to be hard panned, if a guitar solo's over here or whatever, stuff I knew to be hard panned was not. It was just mono. And it was, again, really disappointing. There are sound bars out there in the world that can really do a nice job of giving you a sense of stereo and even surround sound without having to break a sweat. So what Apple did with the A8 chip and all the algorithms that they used to get this sound going, I wasn't very pleased with. The last thing that I wasn't very happy about was the overall volume. Now, I have a decibel meter on my phone. So while I was playing the HomePod, I put up the decibel meter to test exactly how loud this thing was playing at maximum volume. I found that it was just nudging under around 99 up to 100 dB. Now, that is not loud in the sense that like you want the music to just wash over you and sort of envelop and take you away. It's loud in the sense that you wouldn't want it that loud if you were trying to have a conversation over dinner. But it's really disappointing that Apple has capped the range of this volume-wise at such a modest place. Sometimes you want loud, and you can't get loud with the HomePod. It's not just me saying that. It's the decibel meter reading how loud it can possibly get. And if you look at the sound of 100 dBs, you'll find that it is not that loud at all. It's like the sound of a mixer. It just not loud, and no choice to go louder. Another thing that really disappointed me was there is no way to get in and EQ this device at all. So if you're not happy with the overextended bass, if you're not happy with the sort of pumped up mid-range, too bad. Apple has decided that that's the way this thing should sound, and you can't change it. Very disappointing. But I didn't keep it down here and listen in the studio because this is a larger room, and I feel like this is probably better suited for smaller rooms. So this morning I took it up in my bedroom, where I have a setup with 2 speakers that are called Overnight Sensations that I built myself. They were $140 for the kit. You get 2 Dayton Audio speakers, 2 4-inch woofers, 1 1-inch tweeter, and then you glue it all together and do a little bit of soldering and paint it whatever color. They're really, really great speakers that I continually really impressed. They're running through one of those $20 Leppy amps that I talked about in my previous video this week about options for instead of the HomePod. And it has an Amazon Echo Dot hooked up to it, so I can play music wirelessly through the Dot into the amp out of the speakers. In some cases, the HomePod performed pretty well in comparison to this setup. And now, granted, the HomePod, you have to understand, the HomePod is $350. And I get it, you're paying some Apple tax and aesthetic blah, blah, blah for this. But $350 is a lot to ask for a standalone speaker. Whereas my Overnight Sensation kit is less than $200, let's just say, depending on price fluctuations. Less than $200. The HomePod was competitive against that system in a lot of instances, but in a lot of other instances, it seemed to sound much thinner and much more brittle while still having that overextended bass sound. I listened to a lot of stuff trying to figure out why that might be. The Overnight Sensations did a great job of recreating the sound that I knew should be coming out of the speaker for that particular song. And the thing you have to remember is not every piece of music is recorded the same. It's not recorded with the same kind of equipment. It's not recorded with the same kind of people. It's not recorded with the same kind of aesthetic values when it comes to recording. So all music, no matter what, sounds different. The mastering engineer could have been somebody who wanted to create some more dynamic range, peaks and valleys in the recording. A lot of times with older recordings that went to tape, that is the case. Or it could be a more modern recording where everything is just one level and it's pretty loud. So I listened to some Ed Sheeran, I listened to some Beatles, I listened to some Metallica, I listened to some acoustic type stuff. I listened to a lot of different things that had bunches and bunches of different dynamic levels that were recorded with different recording aesthetics in place. And this is what I found. The HomePod, when listening to something modern, when listening to the Ed Sheeran or when listening to a Julia Michaels track, the HomePod sounded fantastic. But when you listen to something like the Beatles' Strawberry Fields, something that does inherently have a lot of dynamics to it and a lot of detail that goes up and down and all over the place, the HomePod really struggled. It wasn't able to recreate those dynamics in the way that the Overnight Sensation package was. And that to me is a problem. Because basically, and this is what I feared the most, was that the HomePod would be all about using software, algorithms, and such to create to create the sense of loudness and to spread that loudness throughout the room. And that's exactly what's happened here. That's disappointing because without being able to recreate reliably all kinds of music, the HomePod can be nothing more than a piece of equipment that can be used for casual listening. On its own, without anything to compare it to, and if you don't have super well-trained ears that know what you're supposed to be hearing when you're supposed to be hearing it, this thing's going to probably blow you away. And if you're a bass person, you're going to love it. It's not bad bass like original Beats or anything. It's just bass that is not connected to the rest of the music, and it's just like boom, boom, which is really distracting to me as a listener. So the HomePod is impressive in its engineering and its aesthetics. It's a beautiful piece, and a lot of people would be really happy to have this in their home and have it sound the way that it sounds. But for me, it's impossible for me to recommend this to anyone for $350 when it is so limited in how you can control it, and it's so overbearing in how it wants to sound, how it forces you to listen to your music. Not to mention the fact that there is no Bluetooth, there's no native support for any service except for Apple Music, and yes, you can play things through AirPlay, but AirPlay is a pain in the ass. It doesn't have any inputs. It doesn't have any outputs. It works best with Siri and not with your devices. It is a very specifically designed piece of equipment. And my experience has been when you have something that is really restricted in how it's built, why it's built, what it's built for, and you don't have the choice to change any of that, it's not going to be a very good experience with this device. So again, I can't recommend this to anyone out there. When you can get something that sounds equally as good or better, depending on the type of music you're listening to, the kind of room that you're in, all that kind of stuff, then the HomePod is just not cutting it. Casual listeners, fine. But just don't say, I didn't tell you so. Tell me what you think. Did you get a HomePod? Are you getting a HomePod? Are you going to get two? Are you satisfied with the sound? If you did get one, I want to know. I want to know. Down in the comments below. If you want to see the video that I created with HomePod alternatives, I'll put it in the bink over here, and it'll be down in the description as well. So, talk to me. Tell me what you think. I'm not trying to be an asshole here. I'm giving you my honest opinion. Painfully Honest Tech. That's why it's called Painfully Honest Tech. I've spent years and years of my life learning to listen to music, and I'm trying to give you the benefit of that experience in reviewing this device. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is Painfully Honest Tech. Tech so honest it hurts. Chop, 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 chop. Until the next time, I'm out.